Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's football game between your Maple. Wrong sheet. Okay. Together. Sai, oos, la. Sai, oos, la. Okay. Sayasla, faraway waters in the native tongue of the coastal people where I live. Western Oregon, between Eugene and the Pacific Ocean. Our close neighbors are the Russians. Share the same watershed, it's called the Pacific. And I do have the privilege to work on both sides of that watershed. This is our place, and I'm trying to use this and this so I don't have to turn my back on you all the time. Not that I don't trust you, but, okay. I live in a rainforest. I have rainforest cattle. I tell some people that I know will get upset that they're genetically modified. We've introduced duck genes into our cattle. Last year, 2013, we had a drought. It was the driest year in 105 years they've been keeping records. We only got 65 inches of rain. I once tried to fit into a conversation with some ranchers from the Southwest. He said, yeah, we have air drought. How much you get? 75 last year. We get 2 inches every other year. So I know my place. This is kind of the terrain we occupy. It's very green and it's very narrow bottomland and steep-sided timber hillsides. This is my son Shadow moving a bunch of our cows. He will figure prominently in this presentation because he probably would. I'm the third stringer on this presentation. Elena Pomeroy was going to give it, and she fell in love with a guy from New Zealand. My son was then second in line, and he's in Kenya doing research for his PhD among the Maasai, and I'll be focusing on that a little bit, trying to make it relevant. This is our herd bull, the Iceman. He came with a number on his paper, and his father's name was Glacier Chateau. So we call him Iceman because he's so cool. This is Shiloh at home on the range in Kenya, which is a hardship for me because he's in Kenya helping the Maasai with their cows, and I'm left alone with ours, waiting for him to come home. A little bit of shameless self-promotion. This is a novel I wrote about 160 years of Wyoming history from 1849 to 2004. And I invoke it for the next quote, but I have another novel that's going to be available. It's already available by Kindle on Amazon called For Spacious Skies. Trying to pass myself off as a patriot with those titles, which I am. But this comes from the book. Cows will bunch up for protection. Hard to separate them from the crowd. Some people are that way, but some are the loners. When I came to settle in the West, the loners seem to be the best. Maybe that's because of all the wide open space. There's one thing sure, the need for independence is what got Americans into the West in the first place. So this is the historical context that I'm going to talk about collaboration, cooperation, and the future. So, using a quote from Wallace Stegner, this is the native home of hope. Only when it learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the pattern that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has the chance to create a society that matches its seed. I want to make a couple definitions that are somewhat prejudiced, perhaps from my own perspective, and tell you a little bit about why and how they come about. I see conservation as accomplishing the long-term goals of having both protection and productivity on the same working landscape. Preservation is about abandoning this attitude, abandoning active management options on a set-aside landscape, whether or not it has been previously humanly impacted. Now, part of my jaundiced attitude about this situation is the fact that I came up through the conservation district movement. And since the Dust Bowl and Teddy Roosevelt, conservation had that top name. And conservation districts and the Soil Conservation Service and that kind of people on working landscapes being liaison between government programs and private land had the ownership of the term. One day, I got up and I was making coffee and listening to the radio, and I heard the headline: 7 conservation organizations have just sued the Forest Service. And somebody had hired a think tank to say that being called preservationist was no longer a good thing for fundraising and other types of activities by the greenest community. And so they switched their name from preservationists to conservationists, thereby usurping the historic ownership of that term by people on working lands. And you hear it today often and often. A conservation organization says no more cows on federal land, and yet we're a room full of people who live in conservation. So these are the things that happen. As I was coming up through the conservation district hierarchy in Oregon, I was confronted by a very aggressive, strong logger fella named Casey Banana, in his Reagan Bush suspenders. And he came up and he put his finger as close as he could get to my chest without touching me. He said, "We're going to nominate you for second vice president." And I looked at him and I said, Casey, you cannot want me. Look at my earring, look at my hair. I could be a tree hugger. Casey looks at me and he says, "That's all right, I'll hug him before I kill him." I said, no. He said, "You think it over, you've got till tomorrow morning to say yes." He came back tomorrow morning with a log truck driver and himself. Casey, you don't want me. I could think the opposite of you on anything or everything. Yeah, well, we can handle it. So I moved up into being the state president and then being on the national board and things like that. And one of my greatest honors was to be the chair of the Western Coalition of Conservation Districts, representing at least 13 Western states, expressing the need for some kind of recognition of Western issues, which we started by trying to teach the people east of the Mississippi about grazing. President of NACD, so Don't tell me how that's a conservation issue. If you get down and put your face on the ground in your cornfield, you see rows. If you get down and put your face on the ground in a grassland, you'll see grass also grows in rows. Don't worry. Water. They don't have water rights issues. Endangered species. Theirs were all either extinct or they hadn't listed any back in 2000. A few other property issues and things like that. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history of that struggle to get the recognition for Western issues. Where I live, we have endangered species. We have very famous spotted owl. We have the marbled murrelet. That's a seabird that requires old growth timber to lay its eggs in. We have the snowy plover that lives on the beach. We have the salmon species that go in and out of being threatened, endangered, and delisted and back in again. We have endangered loggers and endangered commercial fishermen. Right now, I want to comment on, Robbie brought up the single species, and it runs through the single species recovery and protection. Right now, the SWAT teams in our foresty area who used to work hunting down pot patches are being retrained to learn the difference between a barred owl and a spotted owl. Because a barred owl is an invasive. Came from somewhere, and they determined that it was humanly caused invasive because it hip-hopped across shade trees that were planted by settlers through the prairies and allowed it to get to Oregon. And so therefore humans can have SWAT teams to assassinate barred owls to protect spotted owls, even though they can't tell them apart. And so the SWAT team has to have training to learn to tell the owl from the owl. So this is one of the consequences of species by species protection. I'm supposed to talk, and I'm here to represent our BCC Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. Working together. And that's what I'm going to do now with my I've been involved in this organization, which is a rather unstructured organization, but I've been involved for at least 8 years. I serve on the core group, which is kind of a steering committee, and my Saisla Institute, which is a community-based nonprofit, is one of the members. Absence of coordinated rural voice. Solutions-oriented. I learned in CRMP that you want to start your process by agreeing on the goal before you say who's at fault. And in my country, it might be, could you all live with abundant salmon run going up the creek? This is 30 years from now, can you live with abundant salmon run going up the creek and sustainably harvested logs coming down the road on the front? Anybody can't live with that? Good, okay, good. What do we need to do to get there 25 years from now? And then you get into an auctioneer case. 20, 15, 10, 8, 7, 5, 3, 2, 1. What do we need to do tomorrow together to get to our common goal? Well, we need to establish the problems, not the causes and people that make the problems, but the problems. And then we need to start thinking about next steps. And if the only thing we can agree together on to get out there and do is to pick up litter along the riverbank, let's do it. And while we're picking up litter, that guy that sat across the table and stared daggers at me, and the one I talked behind his back about, we're showing each other pictures of the kids, or the grandkids, or we're talking about the referees at the last basketball game at the high school, or whatever. And the litter's getting picked up. are happening. Rural communities wanted to speak for themselves on forest management issues, and RBCC started off as a forestry-based organization. In 2001, the network became the RBCC. 32 people were at the first meeting, all represented community-based forestry groups. No funding, did not set out to create an organization, just wanted to get something done. I think that's a kind of a praiseworthy place to start. Now, in the western states, and with some connections further east, 170 organizations sign on to letters and statements and things like this, and be counted as people who have had some exposure and participation with RBCC. They come from RBCC people come into call-ins and sign issue papers and come to the annual policy meetings and things. They can be agency people, academic people, contractors in restoration or exploitation, doesn't matter. People who are involved on the ground, on the land, in the community. That's what it's made up of, and you're all going to be invited to participate if you're not already. In 10, 11 years, 700 meetings in DC, and I want to emphasize that other organizations tend to aim at the top. They want to meet with the secretary or the chief or whatever, and that's really well and good, and I'm proud to have met at that level a little bit myself. RBCC tends to concentrate a little bit more at the staff level of the agencies and a little bit more at the staff level of the legislature, getting a kind of a peer-to-peer connection with the people that really are in the trenches doing the work, and getting them to advocate internally to move things up. Been invited to appear at testimony nowhere near as many times as Mr. O'Toole, but we go once in a while. Issue papers. Working groups create issue papers. It's a hard process to get an issue paper done, and it goes out to be signed on by whoever and however many people in the network support that issue paper after a comment period. It then becomes the foundation of the advocacy work of the organization. Comment letters, we initiate some, others we sign on to. We're always putting up on an email who's wanting to sign. Okay, here's some principles that I hear, and I think I'll give you a second to read them. That last one took a little bit of arm twisting and took a little bit of conversation, because for people other than Dennis and Deb, it might seem a little radical that we were opposing profit, and we would drive away the sources of funding and other things like that. But what we really mean is sustainability means reinvestment in the landscape, the ranch, and the operation, and survival of that operation and that ecosystem is far more important than the profits that come off of it. And that's a value. And I think it's a functional value, not just a woo-woo thing. So, strive to rally around these things of promoting ecological responsible. That's a vague term, so a lot of people use it. Economically equitable. In the workforce, to the agency, to the community, to the ownerships, there has to be something for everybody, or a policy or a change will falter on the rapids doesn't mean everybody has to get everything. Resource restoration, maintenance, and monitoring. Getting money from monitoring, anybody know how that is? And economic development. I want to say something about monitoring related to Grady's talk. There was someone said, you know, when they heard about monitoring, they said, well, the way I see it is if you want to know how healthy the grass is, you don't look at the grass, you look at the cow. If you want to know how healthy the cow is, you don't look at the cow, you look at the calf. And that was that guy's monitoring program. Now it's a little superficial perhaps, but it has a little bit of sense to it. Strengthen and empower the voices of rural leaders, which all of you are one. But policy is not enough. No matter what level it's coming from, policy is really based on wish lists, and we want to be able to do this, and we want this, and we want that, and this is the way it's going to be. It's either dictatorial or fantastical. You know, it's hard to get policy to function on the ground. So, one of the things that is predominant activity of RVCC is the work to change the laws and procedures that block community participation in the restoration and stewardship of public and private lands. In the Forest Service, they have the Green Line. The Green Line goes around all federal national forest lands. And the pendulum at the leadership level of the Forest Service, and I've been through several chiefs in my time, the pendulum goes from, it is the mission of the Forest Service to manage the people's national forest. And then that pendulum will swing. New administration, new chief, whatever, a few people change, retire, swings over. Sometime eventually it gets to, no. It's the mission of the Forest Service to manage and work with the adjacent communities of federal lands to have a generously open approach to the management of old watersheds, landscape scale. Ooh boy, now those people don't last a long time at the head of the Forest Service, but they go there and they do their work. One of my friends, Jim Furnish, was one of those. Anyway, and it goes back the other way. No economic development for rural communities. No Forest Service assets going offside out there. So RVCC has that experience and says restoration and stewardship of public and private lands. Promote the local efforts and innovations that are coming out all the time because of creative, thinking, hardworking, and working together people. Bring rural leaders together to accelerate learning, share contacts, adopt best practices. Build a cadre of rural leaders who can speak about the impacts of existing and proposed policies on their communities and adjacent landscapes. And help create again and again and again. And I was hesitant to use the word create because somebody said, well, there's already been attempts. It's been created. There are some. Help create over and over and over again a national movement for place-based conservation. So these are the values, some of them. The structure, there's a core group that makes decisions when it has to, that are coming up from, nobody speaks specifically, I'll get to that. One of the working groups is the Working Lands work group. And Shiloh, my son, and I, and Elena, worked very hard a few years ago to drive a wedge into RBCC for rangeland issues. It was forest-centered. And we said, it's not enough. And what about all the allotments? And what about? So the Working Lands Work Group has primarily been working with ranching and rangeland and community-based organization, stakeholder group concepts since its inception. There's a public lands work group that doesn't really deal with allotments of lease land, that stays in the working lands part. And then there's a biomass utilization work group, and there's a climate work group. And those are flexible, they change, come and go sometimes. No one organization or even an individual speaks specifically as a leader, spokesperson for RBCC. It's a problem when something has to be spoken to immediately and a microphone gets shoved in somebody's face and says, what's RBCC's position on the blah? Well, we'll work on an issue paper and get some consensus from the ground, and in about 4 months come back, I'll have it for you. And that doesn't satisfy the buzz people. Issue papers and in-person connections, sign-on letters with broad representation. Up until this past year, there was an annual policy meeting about a little bit, maybe 150 people. Funding has dried up for a lot of the nonprofits and foundations and those that do conservation rather than preservation have some issues with funding, and we're trying to get this straightened out so we can go back to having an annual gathering of representatives and people. One week a year, representatives from RBCC go and beat the doors of the congressional and agency staffers, etc., and go around with the issue papers and explain them and share them and things. In-state and regional agency and legislative office visits are going on constantly, and conference calls and email below. These issues you're all familiar with in your work, whether you're with Extension, whether you're a rancher that's reaching out to your neighbors, whether you're working in school, academic, but our community capacity, and that's a broad term. Collaboration, restoration, stewardship, working landscapes, sort of range mostly. Contracting reform. Let's get the contracts, no matter whether it's a grazing allotment or a stewardship contract for harvesting timber. Let's get them to work. Get them to be easy. I did a lot of restoration work for salmon, and there were so many permitting agencies that I had to go through. I said, give me the most difficult permit to get. Show me which one it is. When I qualify for that one, the rest of you all just sign off. You know, if I can get the hard one, you gotta let me go, you know, because so much time and staff is spent on these dilly exercises. Anyway, I'll get to some of these, but you can see what they are. And then every year there's an appropriations rodeo in DC. Okay, these are things that have to be dealt with if you're doing this kind of work almost every year. And things like the Farm Bill seems to be, there's no such thing as an annual work task on the Farm Bill. It's eternal. It's like the Holy Ghost. It's all around us all the time and moves in mysterious ways. You know? And so we have to keep our fingers on the pulse of the Farm Bill. Energy legislation more and more affects the West. Public lands, grazing and ranching, stewardship, contracting out of the Forest Service. Some of you may have familiarity with that. I could spend a whole hour on that. County payments, community forestry, annual appropriation, and administrative policy. Sometimes you can't get the legislature to change things, and you go to the executive branch, and maybe you find somebody who will make everybody mad. Hey, we can't please everybody and do everything. We found that out. Okay. There are long-time interests in the organization after 10 years, and there are newer member interests that occasionally have to be worked out because. And finding the mainstream. I often talk about the concept like the radical center and things like that. That the most dangerous place on the road, on the highway, most dangerous places, line that goes down the middle. Because you've got the extremes just wailing by on both sides, going different directions, fast as they can. And they're waiting for you to make one false step off that center line. Boop. Mosquito on the windshield. So finding the mainstream and getting the mainstream, whatever it is, to support reasonable and necessary and desirable activities and actions, and plans, and proposals. It's hard work. And it's got to be done. Funding is always needed. You find that along with monitoring, the funding the business of conservation is always an uphill battle. The grant will pay for the phone call, but who's going to pay for that person to be there to answer the phone? Who's going to pay for that phone bill? The call is paid for because it goes on the grant ledger. But the business of conservation is very often not understood by funding sources, foundations, and other sources like that. Complexity of the political process, and of course politics that thrive on conflict and crisis, and a media that does the same. Our future direction is maintaining a diverse Western rural voice and a national focus for these policy objectives. Making a case for federal investment in collaboration and community-based organizations. We have one in Region 6 in the Forest Service where there's now grant funding for capacity development of community-based organizations. Very innovative. NRCS and the U.S. Forest Service, RBCC got them to sit down in the same room and come up with this program. And we hope that it will spread out across the nation. And we hope it'll stay in the Northwest as well and not get shut down. Collective impact and greater CBO exposure, new and expanded partnerships. Okay. The ranching and rangelands aspect of RBCC is still being incubated, but we have issue papers. And if I had brought the issue papers I had, this is so exciting, this presentation and this material, that it would have caused a huge fight when I had only 20 of each of those papers. So I'm really glad I forgot to put them in the suitcase. But I will give you the website at the end, or you can go on RBCC, Sustainable Northwest, or RBCC. You can get all the material you want on these things that have involved. We had to develop a focus and a consensus and get participation in conference calls to even begin to elicit the responses necessary. Create an issue paper that other people will sign on to. Reviewing what exists. The old burglar taught me you use what you got to get what you need. If all you got is a nail file, you use that to break in somewhere and get a screwdriver. You get a screwdriver, you can get a crowbar, etc., etc. Use what you got to get you what you need is to review the existing assets, find out what's out there, find a way to access it, and then move forward with your partnerships and get the policies in place and find out whether it's administrative, legislative, or judicial solution that you're looking for. Don't waste time asking for somebody for something they can't give you. Huge waste of time. Okay. Application of our process to the effort and constituency. That's you and everybody else. There was a diagram here. Oh, here it comes. Look at this. I'm a painter. Okay. Wow. These are the kind of elements that come together in any community that can be moving forward in some of these issues. You see, you've got the government, you've got conservation interests, you've got industry and labor, and then the community is at the center of all this and is made up by these stakeholder interest groups. Not to exclude those people from outside of the particular community, but to be inclusive and fit the diagram. Now, there is no set formula for community-based organizations, except for they're usually locally based. They involve stakeholders of all types, and they can be an SWCD with elected representatives. They can be a church group. They can be whatever, but if their focus is locally based solutions to natural resource issues, that's what we're looking for and looking at. Commitment to a collaborative process. There's all kinds of decision making across the board, consensus to voting to dictators. Rely on both local and outside sources of knowledge. One of the failures of the government agencies has been to disregard and ignore anecdotal knowledge because it doesn't have a footnote. It doesn't have a reference. It doesn't have a location on the World Wide Web or the microfilm library. Anecdotal information is extremely vital as you move forward in restoration activities and in becoming, as Dennis said, becoming old by moving forward to the new in terms of what works and what has worked and what shouldn't work. And, the llama craze in this country did not really pay a lot of attention to the historical implications of infatuation with change. Strong emphasis on economic and rural well-being. Support local group. The CBO supports the local groups, individuals, and other participants in collaborative efforts. Liaison and mediator between landowner interests and the agency. That happens and can be done. I've been a interpreter between the Forest Service and the local community for 30 years in my country now. And it's a thankless job. But once in a while it's entertaining. And it has to be done. CBO provides continuity and records and records important in the context of the turnover rotation factor in the agencies and other partnerships. Oh my God. You lose your wildlife biologist in the Forest Service district office, and it's going to be 6 months, and you're going to have somebody on detail by phone, and you've got to get a signature to get a project okay, and things like that. So, these things matter. Here's a couple things on the ecological value of CBO. It can aggregate landowners and ownerships and even agency holdings to connect fragmented landscapes that are otherwise ineligible for certain kinds of funding for projects or certification or other assets, and aggregating, bringing people together who have similar similar needs, objectives, similar resources, whether it's timber, whether it's fish, whether it's an endangered species they all face. All that aggregating the landscape gives you more clout. It also gives you more opportunity to reach assets. Assist partners in design, permitting, and implementation. That should be obvious that help is needed. Provide monitoring services and outreach. Work to overcome divisions between public and private land and waters. One thing that's going on in the West is the allotments that are a mix of forest and grazing. Not too uncommon. And yet back in the Southeast they have a silvicultural hybrid thing where grazing and tree growing is understood. Well, we should have, instead of grazing versus forest, or forest versus grazing in the West, we should find ways that they can be compatible, symbiotic, and work together. And contracts should reflect that. So, anyway. Okay, I gotta move. They provide skills and help find match funding, research innovation, and other things. Our vision, the RBCC vision for ranching is public and private rangelands will provide multiple values to society, including fish, wildlife, clean and abundant water, space, food, fiber, lasting employment and production and stewardship, recreation. Protect Western cultural traditions in the communities that depend on them. Competing demand for value and land uses, we've heard plenty of that today. Habitat concerns caused by both invasive and endangered species. You get hit from both directions with that one. Global market pressures and corporatizing of the land base. Increasing threats from drought, wildfire, and other extreme climate. Lack of good monitoring. Declining federal budgets, understaffing, downtrodden, downsized, overworked agency people, lack of capacity to resolve conflict before it goes to war, limited opportunities for intergenerational transfer of land and knowledge. Dennis talked about their format. We have 4 owners on our land, my brother, my ex-wife, and another partner, and among us we have 6 kids, and we have gotten a commitment from them that our land is not real estate, and that the conservation easement we have on the forest section and other things will be, as long as they're in charge of that piece of land, it won't be sold. Doesn't mean they have to live there. They have to get good people to live there and take care of it. But we didn't bust our butts for 25 years of mortgage to get a piece of land so that somebody could sell it before we're cold in the ground. And they know it, and they like it, and they're in it. Decline of a rural community, vitality, do all of the above. Utilize collaborative, rely on state and regional rather than federal initiatives for some things, a lot of things. And provide long-term public lands grazing allotments. Increase incentives, utilize the stewardship workforce for NEPA data and collection and outreach. We did that. I employed people to do the Forest Service data collection under their supervisors. Worked really well. Create funding sources for festivals and celebration of Western life and its roots. Now, quickly. We are not alone. Worldwide, pastoral and natural resource-dependent communities are under threat of extinction caused by globalization of markets, overregulation, and other uses competing for land, water, and other resources. For example, Mongolia, Argentina, Kenya, Russia, and the Western United States. Collaboration and cooperative responses are leading the way in preserving indigenous traditions and livelihoods. I've had the privilege of working on the Russian Pacific side with salmon issues. These are the leaders of 8 public salmon councils that have been formed without becoming without being part of the Russian government. It's slightly revolutionary. But where else but Russia? And this is a collaborative council organization, and it's based on the Larship Council model in the U.S. However, they don't have private land, so you lose one big component called the landowner. So it's a challenge. In Kamchatka region, that's a banner that says Saving Salmon Together, and this is the festival. Probably 1,000 people come through this salmon-centered festival every year. They gave us an award for our work in helping to create the organizational underpinning for this activity. These are a couple of Mongolian activists who are in prison right now, and I want to mention them because they led the fight to stop industrial damage from gold mining, etc., from international corporations in the headwaters of all of the rivers that feed the grazing lands of Mongolia. Great guys. I hope they get out of prison and get back to work. Masai Land, Kenya. Local collaborative approaches. And this is what my son is doing his PhD work on. The evolution of the collaborative response after thousands and thousands of years of communal and collective management of the landscape. The threat is from the hopeful, there was the hopeful, the hateful, and then there's the harmful. And the harmful might be well-intentioned, but they can be, in the Maasai world, it's international organizations and nations that think they know what's best for the Kenyan landscape and are convinced through assistance dollars the Kenyan government to privatize the landscape, eliminate any predator control of the mega species so the Europeans can come and take pictures of them and things like that. And you know the drill, but the goals of these collaborative approaches are open space conservation and wildlife protection, while maintaining pastoralism as the most important facet of the local culture of the economy. The exchanges, and Dennis has had the opportunity to be part of these exchanges between the Maasai, the Mapai, and other people. The reason this is important, they identify common threats and possible solutions facing their livestock-dependent communities, and forms of collaborative rangeland management blending traditional and modern strategies. And I think it's here. This is the organization, 15 communities, 2.1 million acres of Maasai land. Is community-based and community-driven initiative whose primary role bring the landowners together to create the structure and process by which they continue to have group branching and manage the landscape as a whole and still cooperate and get the assistance and regulation easement from government that is coming down from across the world on Kenya. So here's the issue. History is being made. I'm real strong on this one. As they move toward, and are moved toward, individual ownership of land, in the USA, ranchers are moving toward a little bit of increased collaboration. Each other's past can inform the other's future as to what to do and what not to do. Maasai and Western American cattle people are both, and Mongolian and Argentinian and Russian steppe people, adapt to modern pressures while trying to maintain tradition and protect historic cultures and landscapes. So I see it like this. I see that the Maasai are coming from 10,000 years or more of raising cattle collectively, moving from drought to grassland, micro-drought here, exchanging with their uncles or their wives, great-grandfathers, landscapes and things, and constantly using the land for their needs. reinforcing privatization, private land, like we did to the Indians here in 1886. You now have a parcel, you can now lease it or sell it to a Tanzanian or Belgium. So they're moving from collective to private and trying to respond to it. Our ranchers, and certainly the Malpai, the Blackfoot, and some of the other things that we know about, are moving from the rugged individualism, the John Wayne era that it took to conquer the West and inhabit the West, moving to a more collective and cooperative realization that if we're going to survive and stay here, we have to get a whole lot more cooperative over water, over land, and over all the other things that come together. And so this comparative study that he's doing and that other people are involved in is vital to the future, because all of these conflicts and crises feed into climatic extremes. Extremism is not just the weather. Extremism is the cataclysmic visions on one side and the denial factions on the other that threaten all of us who seek to sustain a way of life that can both survive and be inadequate. And when people try to drag me into this argument, global warming, 2003, climate change, 2009, what do you think? What do you think? Whose fault is it? What do you think? Let me hear you. I just say, as really farmers and ranchers and loggers have been saying all along, we always talk about it. We always talk about the climate. And we end up saying, whether or not. And I back out of those arguments, because the way of life that we're going to have to adopt and adapt to is necessary regardless of what happens with the climate. And the climate's kicking our butts to make sure we do. Okay? Although threatened on all sides, this way of life holds out one of the truly possible solutions to the current situation. Savory Institute done the research, others, and the future of human life and society. The world's grasslands and their people offer a way of life that is both ancient and adaptive. It's based on, we hear it all day, resilience, diversity, and unity. I came up with this word one time. We are all unique. And that's what collaboration is. It's bringing together each and every individual need, idea, and heart to come together to seek solutions that no one agency, no one university, no one person, no one ranch could ever come up with on their own. And together, we again become the native home of hope. RVCC wants to work on that. Contacts, you can get it off the web. I have a card or whatever if you want to talk to me, or buy me off or whatever. Don't forget dogs over there. Oh, okay. Then I wanted to say one comment without a question. Charlotte came in one night and said, hey Dad, something really weird happened out there. Just because I hope I don't repeat things that you've already heard. I was trying not to. Dad, something really weird's going on out there. I heard one of the cows talking to the other one. I said, yo, what'd they say? He said, well, one of them said, oh. I said, shut up. There's nothing weird about that. I said, yeah, but Dad. The other one said, damn, I was just going to sing.
All right, comments or questions? Speaking of BS. Or CS.
Yeah. Sure.
Do you see any hope for speed forces? Do you see any measures
Yeah, I do. Do I see any hope for the Forest Service? And being able to work with it. I'm very fortunate. Our forest is a incredibly vanguard outfit. But we are the tree growing, litigation free forest in America. I mean, we haven't had a lawsuit. We involve the environmental community in determining our sales and everything else. So that's good. But the key to the Forest Service is that if you get agreement at the top, and the chief is not a dumb person, and he's okay, and you go in and you talk to them, and you can sometimes, with agencies, you can get some kind of agreement and things at the top, but you will never get that to go from the chief's office down to where you are and where you need it. Because middle management would say, oh, well, that would be a bit of a bother. Or, I only have 379 days left before I retire. I'm not about to learn something new. So it's the grassroots that take the mandate, take the agreement and support at the top, which, you know, we do have to get sometimes, and go in at the bottom and knock on the door and say, you have to answer the door, and catch those people in a pincer movement between us and the chief. So get the buy-in at the top, and then take it and push it through the door from the bottom and squeeze the action out. And you will find, I have found, that there are people at the middle levels of the agency who are grateful because they know what they're doing is not enough or right. And they are grateful for the excuse, quotes. I didn't have a choice. Those guys were gonna, well, I don't know what they were gonna do, but we have to do this, you know. So it's a long-term thing, but that's the only thing I've found. And I don't think that answers your question. But it is evolving, and you catch the pendulum. And the other thing is, never ask somebody for what they can't give you. If you've got the green line people, ask them for what you want done on forest land. If you've got the community expansive people up there at the top, ask for the things that they can do. It's like playing Republican to Democrat. Okay. Anything